here is Muelsyse. She is the goober, the blobber, if you will. Muelsyse has a billion mechanics to play around with. What makes her so complex? Well, let's find out. Yeah, I called you into my office because I want your insight. I've always wanted to be a cute anime girl, but I'm not sure what steps I should take. Yeah, that's a great idea. Do you mind if I shadow your daily routine to see what a cute anime girl such as yourself does throughout the day? Muelsyse is a Tactician Vanguard, meaning she gets a placeable goob in her range and deals 50% more damage to enemies blocked by the boog. The highlight for Tactician Vanguards are their summons. Like I mentioned 2 videos ago, Muelsyse's Doober, 5 seconds after deployment when you activate its skill, is able to copy 90% of the stats, range, and block count of any operator in your squad. Switching to another op to copy comes at the cost of a 100-second cooldown. The bloob isn't able to copy the trait or talent, so if you think you can become the map-wide AoE god by duplicating someone like Ifrit, you'll be extremely disappointed to find out that the Foog will only hit a single enemy per attack instead of making the entire stage in Ifrit lane. However, there are some preferred operators you want to copy over others. If you want to copy melee operators, big stat sticks like Mudrock, Penance, and Eunectus are your best choice. Copying melee units gives the Foob the ability to steal 10 attack and defense from enemies for every hit it does, up to 25 times for a total of 250 on each stat. This means that even though the Shood only copied 90% of the operator's stat, its base stats will wind up having more attack and defense than the actual operator themselves, which makes up for that stat reduction. Remember, the stats are stolen from the enemy, and 250 less attack and defense on a targeted enemy is really strong, but the douche takes way too long to reap the effects of it, so making use of the debuff isn't feasible in most situations. Retreating the Zoog while it has stolen stats doesn't remove these stats, but once you clone another operator, the extra attack and defense are gone. If you want to copy ranged ops, Dorothy or anti-air snipers are your best options because of their fast attack interval. Copying ranged units gives the goober the ability to form a clone on any open tile in the 4 adjacent tiles up to 4 times. This effect will happen every 10 hits the base Doober does, meaning you don't want to copy ranged operators with slow attack intervals like Firewatch or casters. Muelsyse's Fugu, while it is capable of having way stronger stats than the other Tactician Vanguards due to its ability to duplicate operators, does not come with its own sustain. The Goob has a 25-second cooldown when it dies, which is 10 seconds longer than Beanstalk and Arknights cooldown, the only other Tactician Vanguards. You want to avoid this long dead time in a bad situation as much as possible by either regenerating the Floob through passive healing like Angelina's talent, or retreating the Ploob when there's downtime on the map. However, if you're using a general squad, most maps don't require this much dedication to keep the blobber alive. Muelsyse's second talent reduces the DP cost of Rhinelab's ops by 2, and the first Rhinelab's op to be deployed will also have a reduced DP cost of 1. While the other Rhinelab's ops are useful, this talent isn't anything too good because DP is usually never an issue outside of stages that reduce passive cost generation on you. You're almost always going to deploy Muelsyse first out of all your Rhinelab's ops, so she's going to be the one to benefit from that extra -1 cost. Since you're about to eat, would you say "itadakimasu" in this situation? Oh, you just eat your food? Like a normal person? Wow, this anime girl thing was way more complex than I thought. Muelsyse's first skill gradually gives 13 DP. It gives Muelsyse and her Bugu attack and attack speed. Like most skill ones, there's no real reason to use this over her others because it's so mid. The extra attack speed can be good for both versions of the blob. The melee version gets to ramp up its stats faster while the ranged version can keep the clones up. The skill doesn't do anything fancy, so while it does have some interactions with the Slug, you're better off not using this. Muelsyse's second skill immediately grants 15 DP and gives the operator and the Shubu more attack. If the cloned operator is melee, it'll recover 5% of its max HP per second and gain damage reduction. If the cloned operator is ranged, it will target random enemies within its range and deal 2 hits to them. Even though the skill is worded as if the attacks are double hit instead of doing 2 attacks at once, a ranged Bushu while the skill is up will only need 5 attacks to duplicate into an adjacent tile, unlike the usual 10. For a melee cloned operator, the effects are are actually quite good. Muelsyse's strength mainly comes from her stat stick of a Gumu, so being able to sustain it, one of her biggest weaknesses, is easily covered. The skill duration is 15 seconds, and recovering 5% HP per second with 25% damage reduction will make the blob pretty much unkillable given you copy the stats of a beefy operator. The extra base additive attack is nice, but not really anything game changing. For a ranged Scroob, this skill kinda sucks. It's good for generating clones, but her third skill also does that, and then some. Muelsyse's third skill immediately grants 15 DP and gives the operator and the Frugu more attack. If the Gubu is melee, it'll pull enemies in the 8 surrounding tiles toward it with a small force, and all the enemies it blocked will be stun locked until the skill duration is over. If the Bugu is ranged, it will refresh all of its clones in the adjacent tiles and its own HP, and its attacks will inflict bind for 1.5 seconds. For the melee Duber, continuously stunning enemies is technically a form of damage reduction for stunnable enemies, obviously, but it's not as strong as her second skill Sustain. The pull force is small, so you're not going to be getting any insane attack cancel mechanics, so it is still useful to grab peons and start slapping them into oblivion while stealing their stats. For the ranged summon, this skill is great. You instantly get 4 Mugus to goob around with, and they all start Baja blasting the enemies with a 1.5 second bind, which if you copied Dorothy would be able to perma-sloob on the enemy while shooting goop. While the main Kubu is able to benefit from the plus 50% base attack additive, the refresh clones aren't. Muelsyse is a versatile op that you can either use to lane hold with by cloning a melee stat stick or take care of peons and other low defense enemies with a ranged duplicate. Her S3 is great for a ranged goob with great damage against medium and low defense enemies, able to permanently bind multiple enemies at once. Overall, the melee variation has better sustain with S2, but in most stages you probably won't need all of that extra HP recovery and damage reduction. Put masteries on Muelsyse's third skill, it works fine for both Scroob variations unlike her S2, which only works well with melee. Anyways, that's about it. See ya. So, practicing conversation, do you greet people with "Ohayo Amiya-chan, how are anata kyo wa?" You just say what's up, like a normal person? Wow, this anime girl thing was way more complex than I thought.